There's a place between two stands of trees where the grass grows uphill and the old Revolutionary Road breaks off into shadows near a meeting house abandoned by the persecuted who disappeared into the shadows. I've walked there picking mushrooms at the edge of dread, but don't be fooled, this isn't a Russian poem. This is not somewhere else but here, our country, moving closer to its own truth and dread, its own ways of making people disappear. I won't tell you where this place is, the dark mesh of the woods meeting the unmarked strip of light, ghost-ridden crossroads, leaf mold paradise. I know already who wants to buy it, sell it, make it disappear. And I won't tell you where it is, so why do I tell you anything? Because you still listen, because in times like these, to have you listen at all is necessary to talk about trees. What kind of times are these? A poem by noted and remarkable poet Adrienne Rich. Welcome, my name is Charles Carr, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaborative program between the Moonstone Arts Center of Philadelphia and PhillyCam. The focus of our program is to give our viewing audience an appreciation of the rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia, and to consider there are over 50 organizations, not including universities and college, that advance the love of poetry in our city and our communities, either by offering poetry readings, special poetry events, poetry workshops for poets at all stages of their development, both poets on the page and poets on the stage, as they say, published poets and published poetry, both online and in print, and offer a wide diversity of poetry in our communities. So welcome again. We have a remarkable and a very unique group of poets with us tonight. And the theme of our show is Across the Water. And so I want to introduce our poets, and to my right is poet Olga Livshin. Olga's poetry, essays, and translation from Russian appear in Writers Resist, the Kenyon Review, Poetry International, Jacket, and other journals. Olga's recent work is recognized by Catholic Journal's Lois Cranston Memorial Award, the Cabo Translation Prize, and other competitions. Olga was translated into Persian by Mohsin Ahmadi. I hope I'm saying that right. Olga lives here in Philadelphia with her family. And next to Olga is Natalie Liang. I hope I'm saying that right. Is the author of Blood Makes Me Faint, But I Go For It, published by Ugly Duckling Press in 2014. Pink and Hot Pink Habitat, published by Coconut Books in 2009. And a chapbook, Try a Little Time Travel, again, published by Ugly Duckling Press in 2010. And Natalie lives in Philadelphia also. And at the far end is Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach. Julia is the author of The Many Names for Mother, winner of the Stan and Tom Wick Poetry Prize, forthcoming from Kent State University this year, and The Bear Who Ate the Stars, published by Split Lip Press in 2014. Julia's recent poems appear in or are forthcoming from Poetry, Best New Poets, American Poetry Review, and among others, Julia is the editor-in-chief of Construction Magazine. And when not busy chasing her toddler around the playground of Philadelphia, Julia writes a blog about motherhood. So welcome. So I gave the theme Across the Water, so I put it to you to describe to me how this theme came about and where you are now in the development of this. So I'll turn to you, Olga, first, and to share that with our audience.
Thank you so much, Charles. Thanks for having us. So the phrase belongs to Julia, and I think very lyrically captures a sentiment that we felt kind of connected to the beautiful poem by Adrienne Rich that you read, this issue of invisibility and the issue of the dangerous visibility that people such as us, there are millions of us, present. After the Pittsburgh shooting at the synagogue several months ago. Several of us were just infuriated on several fronts. I remember waking up and reading about it on Facebook by somebody very much like me, a Jew as well as an immigrant. Robert Bowers, the shooter, of course, targeted Jewish people the morning when they were celebrating the birth of a new baby and celebrating their faith. But also he had written hateful statements about HIAS, the organization that brought actually all three of us to the United States in collaboration with other Jewish organizations. And I was a teenager and my friends were children when this happened. So we came to the United States as children and we've trusted this country. And we trusted its ability to kind of carry us forth from across the waters. So later that day, in a kind of manic state, I started madly texting people who I thought should represent the voices of the community that has been so badly harmed. And immediately Julia and Natalie came to mind. And Julia very energetically helped organize what came to be several of these readings. And so kind of you to give us the opportunity to speak here.
Okay. So where do you go from there? I'm trying to grasp that, you've given these poetry performances and you've publicized the theme. Is this a growing group of poets that, are going to be drawn to this? Not only Jewish immigrant poets or Jewish poets, but poets of all kinds.
Absolutely.
And from all backgrounds.
Yeah. So our hope was that this would not just be a side Jewish project, but that it would be representative of many different communities of immigrants, and especially refugees. So at some of our readings in Philadelphia, we've had a teenager from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and she's an absolutely wonderful poet. And we have had a lovely person who is from Syria as of 2 years ago, who escaped the war. And so it is sustaining for me to see the variety of voices and how this has become a little bit more inclusive and open. We have corresponded with people in Pittsburgh, and there are some hopes of connecting with them there. And certainly, what I've discovered is one interesting thing about your show and this idea of what can poetry do in such times, which is certainly a big question, is that whenever I made connections to the worlds outside poetry, to whether it was Free Library of Philadelphia or the William Way Center, LGBT organization, or a variety of other venues where we were seeking it out, basically the next day after the shooting, I've never had an opportunity to see poetry fit so well with everybody. It was never a question of how much, can you do this? All the logistics, all the stuff that whenever one organizes an event, it was a question of when and how can we help? And it was so lovely just to see that those little tendrils that poetry can make outside itself. It can be a very insular world, as we know. So it was an interesting idea. So my hope is actually that this is a project that can transcend the kind of world of poetry and hopefully be something that non-poets would want to read. I don't know how that, where you see some of those things going as fellow poets. Mm-hmm.
So what happened in Pittsburgh was one incident, but as I read about what is happening beyond just this one horrible event, is that the escalation of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States has, from what I read, in just a year, increased by 60%. And it's in all forms. Desecration of synagogues, threats, on people, etc. Where do you, and others can weigh in on this? Where does this all of a sudden come from?
I think you heard. Well, I don't know if you heard, but all of us just sighed when you gave that statistic, because I think, for all of us coming from the former Soviet Union, this is not surprising. It's something that our families and we have always lived with and known about. And I think, as you beautifully put, coming to America, there was definitely a sense of safety, but I don't think any of us take that for granted. So I think it's a matter of just language is so powerful, and when certain language is allowed to come forward and accepted, in the mainstream, that provokes an action. And I think a lot of people have said that, the rhetoric that's been allowed to go forward, and that has been normalized, has certainly made a lot of people who otherwise would be shunned, people who are racist, who have, complete crazy misunderstandings, not just about Jewish people, but about, all minorities. Those people feel safe now, and they feel like they can say whatever they want. And I think that there's definitely similarities between that happening now and, what took place in the Soviet Union for many, many, many years.
Julia?
I think there's also a kind of naivete about the anti-Semitism that has always been in the underbelly of the country. And as Natalie, you so well said, making any hateful rhetoric and hateful action permissible makes it permissible against all groups. And it's only a matter of time until it comes down to kind of the original hated group of the Jews. And I think, I don't know if in my family's experience, they felt a kind of safety in America. I think growing up, I was constantly reminded that you're not going to be liked. When I dated someone who was ethnically Russian, I was told, do his parents know you're Jewish? And his parents actually didn't know. And when they found out, there was a palpable tension.
Wow.
So I think in my experience, I was always reminded that this was something that you were marked by as different and that it wasn't going to be accepted. And so I wish I was more surprised by what was happening. But for me, it seems, unfortunately, very unsurprising. And given my studies of Holocaust history and Holocaust literature, it's...
Surely many people do not know the contribution that the American Jewish community has made to what we do, which is poetry. I just went, and these are just a couple of names. There's literally 100, over 100, of renowned Jewish American poets. Joseph Brodsky, Allen Ginsberg, Louise Gluck, Jerry Graham, Kenneth Cope, Denise Lervitov, Philip Levine, of course, Adrian Rich, Muriel Rukeyser, Delmore Schwartz, Mark Strand, and Louis Zukoski. And I say that because these people have shaped what we consider American poetry. And that has really been shaped from their experience, the same that you're talking about. And I really find it curious, and it's something that came up, is that I don't think most people know that what is written on the Statue of Liberty was written by a Jewish poet, Emma Lazarus, which is the famous give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched of your teeming shore. If you would ask somebody, well, who wrote that? Where did that come from? And see, there's things that are hidden, in our world that nobody talks about. And nobody talks about this amazing contribution, not only to poetry, but to every form of art in this country. So it's very hard, for an artist to grapple with, how this is happening, how this is taking place.
Absolutely. I'm actually going to just follow up on that. It's very interesting that upon coming to this country, I don't know if that was your experience for both of you, but I was immediately identified as Russian. Versus in Russia, I was always identified by my passport, which said Jewish. And it was a very big deal, just as it was for Julia's family. For my family, it was always, be careful what you say, be careful how you dress, be careful, do not eat too much garlic, you will be hated. And my whole life, this scepter of be careful is following me around. And then one comes to this country, and suddenly, on top of the Jewish sort of layer, there's also this weird Cold War era sort of cloud following you around your whole life. So we have been kind of interestingly kind of getting it for a while, and then Donald Trump gets elected. So it's been very interesting to watch how these creepy shadows follow us around and what we do or do not do to try to dispel them. I mean, I think art is a great way to try to both reflect, capture, but also try to shoo this dark cat away. Is it easy? I don't think it is. I mean, it just comes right back to me, all these stereotypes and generalizations that I don't want to be part of my life, but they show up in my poetry.
Right. So, I mean, some of the poets that I've mentioned, where do you draw that, that source of influence, within poetry? Is it from, Russian poets, or is it from a combination of a lot of things?
So
And I'd say that to everyone.
absolutely. I mean, I think for the sort of interesting thing about this is that, I personally don't believe, and this may be different for a variety of us, but I don't believe in an essentialized identity, whether it's Jewish, Russian, American, female. I just think those are hats we put on and take off as we please, and that is what makes it so interesting. And as a human being, and especially as an artist, we get to live multiple lifetimes by being those various people. So to me, when somebody sees me as whatever, immigrant, refugee, somebody who deserves to die, I mean, how absolutely interesting that they can just, like a shooter can walk into a synagogue and just erase that perspective, that multiplicity of ways in which somebody can see it. Even if I were to dig into my origins, as recently as my own family, they, like many of the poets that you mentioned, those poets assimilated very much, many of them. Now, of course, you can argue that, some of the, Aaron, that Ginsberg assimilated, but also drew, right, on the Bible and on Jewishness. But by and large, I did not, until recently, identify Adrienne Rich as a Jewish poet. I identified her as a wonderful poet of the 60s and 70s and a powerful feminist voice. So how about that? And in my own family, if I go back one generation, they were heavily, heavily trying to chase after Europe, read all the Samizdat, right? Read Joseph Brodsky, which was in Samizdat, read Mandelstam, to get their hands on even like their own Civil Age Russian poetry. It was about becoming cultured. It was becoming cultured in a Soviet way. And then we come to America, and my mother says, by the way, when I was a teenager, I was learning Hebrew and trying to immigrate to Israel. By the way, we're Jewish. And I'm like, oh, I'm 14. You never told me this. And she says, you should celebrate Jewish holidays. I said, I don't think I know any Jewish holidays. She's like, me neither. So we're still having this discussion. So it's just fascinating. And my mother now sees that Jewish culture as a source of culture. But me growing up, it was Anna Akhmatova. My mother looks like her, so I guess we're just doomed.
Natalie?
Well, so much of what you said, especially about assimilation, really sticks out to me, and that's what, I think American Jews definitely have a very different perspective about their Jewishness than Russian Jews, or I think Jews that don't, grow up in countries where being Jewish is quote unquote seen as normal. So to go back to what you said about a sense of safety, I think that even though America, has proven thus far to be a very safe place, for Jews, at the same time, I was reminded that just remember, we're here now and everything seems fine, but this is exactly how they felt in Berlin. And there's going to come a time where you're going to have to leave here. And this is from, people who, from my parents, who are otherwise very sane, people. But of course, hearing something like that, I think we all live with that in the back of our minds, that we're here, but we're here temporarily. It could be 40 years, it could be 20 years, it could be 100 years, but we're not here permanently, and there is really no such thing as safety. But to go back to, I think, my own origins, growing up, just reading a lot of literature, Pushkin was definitely the, poet that I would say, I heard from the time I was born, as I think probably many of us, and then really coming into consciousness, around the time that I was in college and reading Tomáš Šalamoun, who's a Slovenian poet who probably was the most influential in really opening up the channel of receiving poetry and being able to write it and really seeing what you can do with language.
And for me, just following up on that, Pushkin, I grew up, so I feel like the music of Russian poetry is very much something I draw from. Yesenin, Mandelstam, Akhmatova, of course, came slightly later. But for me, a turning point poet was Czesław Miłosz, the Polish poet, and particularly reading his witness of poetry, about that poetry is what witnesses us, not the other way around. And it's just an incredible text, and it really kind of changed my approach. But also I'm so invested in so many contemporary poets, both Jewish and non-Jewish, but Jewish poets like Ilya Kaminsky, whose new collection, Deaf Republic, I'm reading right now, and it's just incredible. Sam Sachs, there's just, the list goes on and on. Jean Dubrow, who are poets whose work is very much invested in ancestral trauma, how it is inherited today, and what we can do with it, how we can kind of activate it for the necessary work in the present moment.
Mm-hmm. So is that where your poetry, you feel, is centered now?
My poetry's always been centered. For me, it's always been about my ancestry and coming from a great grandparent who raised me, who was a Holocaust survivor of the Soviet Union, a great grandfather who died most likely in Babi Yar and was a partisan, and my great grandmother late in life, when she was living with us, started to envision a Nazi had come back to life to kill her, to ravage her, things like that. And so for me, I kind of saw this haunting past that I never knew what to do with, and I still don't know what to do with. I feel like it's something I will continue to struggle with. But I saw her relive it and her continue to be haunted by it. And I have been really struggling with that in my poetry. And then having my son, I thought that it would turn my gaze away from the past, but it actually turned it more to the past and how that past shapes our present.
So as a group of poets, do you have a structure now, or is it you're just trying to attract more people? Of course, write your books of poems and publish them and promote them, but is there like an organizational piece to it now, or is that something you want to happen?
I mean, I think that the first thing I should mention that sounds very prosaic as compared to some of the things we've been talking about is all three of us are mothers. Some of us are of more than one, or God forbid, soon to be, fingers crossed, more than one. I've got one who fills my life with joy and constant activity. So between chasing toddlers around parks and trying to write our poems, we have been thinking that it behooves us to start banding together as some kind of collective. It is an interesting task to find out what it is that it would look like, because there are various versions and permutations of who we are because of the complexities of that identity. So some of the words, just to see, it's kind of interesting to see how these things come up from different angles, have been Ashkenazi Jews, because we have that common experience in the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union, and the people who started in other places predominantly died in the Holocaust in Germany and in Poland. But Russian Jews, then there have been, there's a group on Facebook called Anti-Trump Soviet Immigrants. A very active group of more than 3,000. Their banner image says, "I can't believe we left the Soviet for this. I'm going to say stuff." So there are many things to figure out, but I do think I very much connect with what Julia is saying about having other examples in the world of poets who have dealt with generational trauma and also generational wisdom, and have tried to glean some kind of gratitude and hope from it. I have definitely been writing poems that are about that. Because as we've been talking, and one of the things that kind of arose from the conversations we've had, the predominant thing is that it cannot just be about fear. It doesn't have to be about the lack of fear, because let's face it, I'm afraid. We did a reading and apparently all of our readers thought maybe we should wear a bulletproof vest. That's a first, right? But this is in our lives, but it can't only be about fear, and it can't only be about hatred of like the people who are trying to ridiculous for some completely arbitrary reason. So then what is it about? I mean, it's a very interesting question. For people who were not, none of us were brought up religious, perhaps with your great-grandmother, there was a religiosity. Not
There
that I know
was
of.
speaking Yiddish. It was culture.
Speaking
though.
Yiddish,
Yeah.
exactly.
But I don't think Soviet Jews know how to be religious for the most part. That maybe that's too wide of a generalization.
Well, that's the
but
interesting
because
thing.
religion was forbidden,
Right.
and so some did better with keeping it than others. I
It's interesting that the president was interviewed 2 years ago, and the journalist asked him, tell me what power is. He used one word, fear. That's a very startling thing, but it's really real the way this administration has gone forward and what has been the result of it. So when you say fear is real, because the president of the United States believes power is fear just as much as any dictator believes power is
Yeah.
fear. Yeah.
Well, you said, it can't be about fear, and I also think it can't be about just fear. It can't be about just us, because the truth is that there's been a lot of people who have been living, with this sense of discrimination and powerlessness, way before Donald Trump came to power. So I feel like what's happening now is, like I said, it's coming out of the shadows, but we have an immense privilege, because when we walk around in the world, we walk around as white people. We don't have we don't wear the yellow star, we don't have a banner over our head. So I feel like, we have an immense privilege. And one of the questions, I have, and one of the things that, we've talked about is how do we, make it not just about, a Jewish, a Jewish circle, and it's, Jews have a long history of social justice in the United States, being involved in civil rights. And I feel like, it's important to keep that perspective in mind and not making it just about this is happening to the Jews, because it's really happening to everybody.
Right.
I think that's such a key point that you make, because when you said, we can take our identities on and off, that is an extreme privilege.
Yeah.
I can't take off the identity currently of being a woman and being pregnant, and that identity being often imposed upon me, whether I want it to be or not.
That's the scary part.
And so we have such a privilege, dare I say, in the U.S. to get to be white.
Right.
I disagree.
That others
I guess
don't.
I would disagree. It's a popular word now, privilege. And I mean, I think it definitely has its uses, but I think as artists, we can be whoever we want. We can be in our words, and in other ways. So as a person who wore to my baby shower a men's suit and a fedora, I still look like a pregnant woman, but I look very strange, at least in the photos. I'm like, strange, good. I think that in art, I mean, that, men have been cross-dressing for ages, right? So Madame Bovary was written by a man, and so was Anna Karenina. And, I feel that maybe art is one of the few places where we at least can take it off. We can't take it off in conversation when a person notices my Russian accent,
Sure.
which comes out when I'm nervous, which I am right now. Right? So it's hard to take off an accent, and that I keep bumping up. But I also feel like there is an immense necessity to assert our own agency, our own dignity in these conversations. Because the moment that I went to an ACLU power sort of local meeting, and immediately some person who looked exactly like me and was a fellow Jew and started parading me around her living room and saying, here's a Russian person, I bet she knows something we don't. And I was, as they say, tokenized. I didn't like that conversation. I didn't want to be tokenized, and I just kind of I said, excuse me. But the immediate reaction is absolutely to pigeonhole a person. But I think that we have to fight back against that. And that's why this conversation of calling this Jewish or not calling it Jewish, I think is such a thorny conversation, because on the one hand, it is, to some of us, a very important label, and the world sees us as such, and some of us write about it heavily. And then, there is such a good model of identity politics and identity poetry in our culture. So Kaveh Khanim is an important collective of African American writers that help them achieve not only visibility, but all sorts of wonderful qualities. Like, they really seem to cherish each other's ability to bring them back to life from this immense grief, from these fears, to write such poetry of gratitude, right? Ross Gay, a catalog of unabashed gratitude. I love that poetry. And that's been a model for me, like some of these other poets have been very like Dasbach. So it's very hard to steer away, and why not call it Jewish in some ways, right? Why not call it female? Because that allows you to sort of sit up and lose your microphone. That allows you to see, you can keep your identities on.
No, absolutely, and I agree with that. And I think that it's also important to, remember that we're not in a vacuum, and that we do, the work that we do, we want it to reach other people. We don't want it to be, like about just the Jewish community. And just having that as the main identity, because, like you said, it's very interesting being Russian in America. There's a lot of funny things that otherwise educated people will say to you about, you have insider knowledge about something, or, comparing you to the villain in the Rocky movies, like it definitely, I don't know, it just definitely is, an identity that people want to put on you and want you to kind of, see how you stack up to that or embody that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd like to segue now to, this is all about poetry, and you are, three remarkable poets. So I would like you to share your poems with us and with our audience, and we'd like to hear them. So, Olga, you can go first, and we'll go right on down the line.
Wonderful. Well, I will start with a poem that I think makes a good segue from what we've been talking about. And I think, while I look for it, here I find it, I think that sort of the interesting paradox, and I think this poem is very much inspired by the African American economy experience, but it's a very Jewish poem. And I think that this is what's so interesting about some of these communities, is they inspire us even though we may not technically be part of them, but we're all human, and we've all experienced oppression in some way. And we've all experienced having grandparents, for example, which is what this poem is about. Eating a persimmon, 1954. At 4 years old, in her grandpa's lap, sun-warmed inside an Odessa apartment, my mother tests out a persimmon. She has never met such weird fruit. Sweet jellyfish, creepy crawling. Nu es, little maidele, eat. Her grandpa glows at her, a Jewish wizard visiting from the collective farm. His beard smells like cow poop. In quiet Russian, she asks, Grandpa, do people actually like persimmons? Oh, Monse, silly stories, he brushes her off. Is this why I walked all over the Privoz market for one perfect piece of fruit I could afford, just for you? Have some good silch and eat. My mother sighs and tries to swallow the globe, which spins 60 quick times around the sun, finding her with my grandson and me, all of us considering a bowl of conical, identical supermarket hachiyas, freckled by California, where she now lives. And this story she tells us. And Adam, with his "Niet, thanks but no thanks, Grandma," for that weird fruit. And my mom, who decides to reveal right then the DNA of our family's eating. A pogrom, she said, chewed up her uncle, a violinist, as he ran to shelter. The world chomped on a branch of our family, deer-like, just needing to eat, just minding its own business. For instance, a 6-year-old boy. Had he not died, he'd be an older brother to my mother. She was not born yet, the first child to sprout in that great mishpucha after the war. They all gave me treats, she smiles sadly, going a bit hungry themselves. I asked what a treat was back then, a handful of sugar. How godlike that persimmon, I think to myself. My mother's grandpa must have imagined he gave her the chance to be just this once the eater. How instead he gave her an order, force-feeding the love of forced feeding, the unsubtle art of forcing that I spoon-feed to Adam with a dash of Russian, which passes for some vitamin R, to make a child feel rooted. How there is still a persimmon somewhere in here. My great-grandfather may have wanted his only grandkid to know pleasure, wished so very much for her to dive into an unexplored space, neither the unwatered earth nor trauma's infinite hug, but softness. In the spirit of other positive poems, I'm going to read one that is complicated, but it is about mushrooms, which Adrienne Rich has in her poem that you quoted earlier, so I thought that would be a nice thread. I love looking for mushrooms, and I do it obsessively, like in downtown Philadelphia. Oh, look, mulch! This poem is called Milk Mushrooms, and it's dedicated to my mentor, the poet Janet Sylvester. Woodland sculptures, Lectifluus peperatus, milk flowing, milk caps, morning rolls over their generous white columns, leaks down their dwindling columns, wakes them up, and they babble. Don't worry, darling, we are the safe mushrooms. You've known us since childhood. We are so happy you found us here in the US. Kneel, please. Eat, like Alice. I pluck and bite. The mushroom bites me back, capsaicin on the lips. Edible, but too bitter to bother, the Audubon Guide to Mushrooms declares. Then memory on the lips of famine, war, women run home from work across a field, quick gathering the buckets of these garkushki, bitter littles, and salt them, boil and cleanse of sharpness. Hunger, poison, death itself, they prayed preventable, with salt and heat and clean hands in the sink. And wasn't it? Sad mushrooms granting years of human life, milk mushrooms granting years of Soviet life. Cleansed from necessity by the goddess of necessity. While living in my richest country, I can't clean the world or heal my own mother and father of their time. Mushrooms of stinging milk, the best mushrooms to grieve among, their bare soft skins, my pets. We sit and feel exactly what we feel. No one will judge us here as to anything, not here on this old playground of unwarm sun. I pass the baton to Natalie.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
One of the things that I'm interested in in my poems that that just kind of organically comes up is the idea of names. And the first poem I'm going to read is called Wolverine, and I know that in my family, my great-grandparents changed their last name a couple times, which is actually a pretty common practice for Russian Jews and maybe just in general. And they would change their name to sound more more assimilated, more Russian. So I wanted to play around with that. So I wrote this poem called Wolverine. 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 Wolf. Wolf Slonim. And you are alive, and you are alive, and you are alive. And you are bowing in the direction of Jerusalem. And he was laughing in the bread line, and he was laughing in the milk line. And he was laughing in the soap line, and he was laughing in the meat line. And he was laughing in the flour line, and he was laughing in the shoe line. And you are alive, and you are alive, and you are alive. And you are crying in the car, and you are crying on the phone. And you are crying at the movies, and you are crying at the sun. And you are crying at the stars, and you are crying on a mattress, and you are crying on a husband. And you are alive, and you are alive, and you are alive. Wolf. Wolf Slonim. That's who. Who? Wolf. A whole wolf. Wolf. Wolf Slonim. Wolf Carp. And he was breathing in a village, and he was breathing out a car, and he was breathing in a war, and he was breathing out a bicycle, and he was breathing in a city, and he was breathing out a wagon. And you are alive, and you are alive, and you are alive. And you are huffing in a field, and you are puffing out dust. And you are huffing in a pixel, and you are puffing out a dot.
and you are huffing in an ocean, and you are puffing out sand, and you are alive, and you are alive, and you are alive. Wolf, wolf. And this is a poem that I think talks about some of the anxieties that maybe we mentioned. It's called Natasha, Do Not Eat That Bread. Do not live in fear. 26 years later and the trees are shaking off winter. Many are dead, but more are living. America, is this the end? Do not decompose yet, brain. We have preservation to accomplish. A catalog of all the scratchy blankets and phobias tucked away for later. Go get on a plane. America is a real thing. In the future, you have happy children and a porch and a neighbor who takes out the trash. You survive. Hold on to something. Laugh it off. Resume your digging. Take mom's advice. There is nothing bad in America, but if they come at you wrong, smash all their faces and keep smashing. And I'm just going to read one or two from my book.
And the title of your book?
Blood Makes Me Faint, but I Go For It.
And where can one purchase your book?
You can purchase it on the Ugly Duckling website or
Okay.
on Amazon,
Okay.
but you should purchase it from Ugly Duckling. So yeah, one of the things that I keep coming back to is writing from a place of preservation and family, and kind of grappling with the inherited knowledge of the stories that you hear over and over of tragedies, and I guess I just use poetry as a kind of lens to process all that. Over yonder. In my collapsed summer home, behind my bigger summer home, I experience sunburn. I dream of a submarine in hostile waters. I take a turn into being American. See, I'm so American with my hopes. I make tapestries and ask, is this dumb? Is this dumb? I weave a forest in the south, the whole family looking on. A heavy summer sleep while waiting for the guillotine. Before the body turned, before I hated animals, I stretched out in a hammock and shared diseases, my head in an ache from all the life I was in. Stalingrad, 1943. There was a squawk sound and the clouds flipped to green, the sky yellow. I was counting seeds and noted the moment. It was a strange farm, a strange town, a frightened country we were in. There were not too many schools or children, so there were few balloons. I concerned myself with the sickly garden. It needed bone meal, so I got some. Under the moon's coloring, 30 foxes circled my house and 60 wolves circled them. I called my grandmother to say I would name someone Wolf, and she thought this splendid. We hung up, but I told her to keep living. Keep living, though you are very far away from your country and your friends are not coming home. Bad things happened, but I harvested a giant pepper and ate it whole, and it was very hot and also splendid. I spied a rake and began a short-lived revolution. And going back to names, I wrote a poem kind of incorporating a lot of names from my family of people who, mostly people who I never got to meet. So this is called Zusha, Open Your Ears. You are in a cosmos with Dora and Raisa, Sophia, Wolf, Ansa, and Rivka. You are all circling, circling. You are all drinking tea, having a good laugh. Zusha, I call out to you in your earthly namelessness. In a small hole, I invent you from nothing. Zusha, you are faceless, some cells pulling in different directions. Zusha, this is a resurrection. You are now an algorithm, or a piece of gristle in a wet mouth, or a hen's white egg. Zusha, your bones, your fear, once real, now nothing. Zusha is the sound of a tuning fork, an alien hum in the water, a jellyfish electrifying a black sea, or a rock formation, or a tree. And I think I'm gonna finish, do one more. And I have to say hi to my kids, Oren and Boaz, because I think they're watching, so hi. This poem is called International Women's Day. On this day, we got carnations and balloons. I ate a lobster-shaped lollipop that tasted like death. In ballet class, I floundered with a stomach cramp. I danced like an injury dancing. There were swimming lessons in the hospital's pool. There were chess lessons in the room next to it. I lied about my birthday and the chess students clapped. In etiquette class, I bloodied a pretty nose. My teacher wore her red bikini out into snow. We ate sugar and bread. This was before we let go of the furniture. This was after the hospital. This was before the difficult thing started. It was the first difficult thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm pulling out my phone because I wasn't going to read this poem, but because of our conversation, I feel like I have to. So while I'm pulling it up, my son's birthday is on November 8th. So he was born in 2015. And so he turned 1 on November 8th, which was election day.
Oh my God.
So this poem is called Letter to My Son, November 8th, 2016. Remember, here you are a white man, pearl, bone, tooth, pillowcase, linens, cotton, mouth, mourning, but only here. No, across the water you are dark, soil, branch, riverbed, blackbird, blood, bruise, mouth, mourning. You are otherness among others and among yours. Remember, they won't see it here at first. They'll call you by your given name. They'll hold your hand and ask to hear your history. They'll listen as generations slip from your tongue, soiled bones and teeth and linens and mouths, a shower of stars made brighter by galaxies gone dark. They'll trust you when you say your pockets are empty, but all have taught you to always carry stones, to save them for graves, because you never know when you'll walk among the dead, because you'll know they're everywhere. But remember, here you are a white man with the dead under your skin, your feet, inside your mouth. They crack your white bones, milk teeth, raw gum line, still sealing soft spot. They whisper, you were never one of us, and hold you to their chest to sink you into ground. But remember, little son, you are more than stone or pearl or star or mineral, more than body or metaphor can make you, or color name you, or land and water divide you, more than ma or man or mine. You will know our stories in your bones, branch, black sea, bruised and blooming. When neighborhood boys threw stones at your mother and words at her mother and then hands at hers, when they threw fists at your grandfather and bullets at his and finally shoved your great-great-grandfather so far beneath the earth no stone or throw could reach there, you will know that none of us were white men then. Black pearls, unwished for bones, the Dead Sea rising, still dead. Remember, when half of your ancestors died, the other half did the killing. Remember, murderer and murdered are just one letter apart, and your skin too is translucent, kin on its underside, kin too, just one sibilance away. Remember how much this matters everywhere, how skin hurts, how no love is deep enough to forget, and no skin thick enough to endure. So I wasn't going to read that one, but I pulled it out here. So this poem is called For War and Water. And it comes, Russians and Jews especially, I'm from Ukraine, so I'm saying Russian as a Russian speaker. But we have a lot of superstitions. So this comes from one of them. For war and water. Everyone is having boys, my mother says. That means war is coming. The way it came in the old country, boys rising out of the ice and cold potato fields, boys laying bricks and digging wells and trenches and bodies, boys out of other boys like my boy, born the year before cops killed even more black boys, and more boys killed other boys for loving boys, and more swastikas showed up on walls, and more walls went up invisible where once ran rivers. But a river is not a boy. It can either run dry or bleed, and everyone will blame someone darker or an animal, like the gorilla who dragged away the little boy or the gator who stole another. But in the water, they seem so strong, resilient even. These boys born months apart, these boys who suck the water down, who beat it with their tiny fists and kick as though they're running. These boys who grow not knowing they were born for war and that it's everywhere and there is no outrunning water. And then I want to try to read something uplifting. I have a hard time writing uplifting poems, but having kids makes you see the world in a more uplifting way, and the way that they make metaphor out of everything. So this is a poem taken from the mouth of my son, and the word for moon in Russian is luna. In everything he finds the moon. Yuna, he calls, pointing up and drawing out the oo, the Russian L still too hard to form luna. We understand, make meaning out of what it's left us. Yuna on the shoulder of my shirt, where his sleeping mouth's wet outline left imperfect waning. Yuna in the fabric covering my belly, where his finger found a hole through which skin shone like moonlight. Yuna on the wings of every moth or butterfly. Yuna, more Yuna. Our cat's eyes twinkling in darkness, spinning spheres he is still too slow to catch. My Yuna. In the daylight's glare, he names the sun as his and asks it to come closer and opens wide to hug, to swallow, to hold its unfathomable glow. And in the water too, in any water, Yuna, Yuna, bath, puddle, lake, sea, ocean, rain, our faces and the light, a river, and in the window, any window, especially a stranger's. Yuna, this December morning through smoking sky and a cobweb of trees, he finds it there even as it fades. And in my pocket, I find it too. Yuna, an envelope of his first trimmed crescent hairs, so many fallen moons. And I'll end with a poem called Inheritance, which deals with my great-grandmother that I had mentioned earlier. Inheritance. I wish I remembered my great-grandmother's gaze, the time she spoke turned inward beyond where we are so alike, the first time she told the story. The room too warm, too thick with honeyed light, and I too young for her to think that I was listening. Her features wear me now, the mole on my left shoulder, soft, uneven hips. I see her husband in them. They echo his final vestige, taken away from a kitchen in Kiev, the last place he looked for her before the neighbor whispered, Zhid, and their house was left empty until the war ended and great-grandmother came back to mourn his unfound body, her hollowed home, the city where he may have died. All her silences and stories, full, I grew with them, full, I'll pass uncertainty to my children, told or retold history or memory until one, a fading pulsar, bleeds between stellar glow and blackening sky. And in that distance, who can tell igniting times apart, the difference between the lived and the passed down, a sundial's shadow at noon. I'm wishing again today, still last night in flux, like sand and water and ancestry. I'm wishing for her to have told me his name. Wounded, pocked, shot through. He walks beside me now, so close sometimes I think I feel his hand. His body glows with stars, blood stars. In a voice without gender or race, I hear him call, and I am one among the many, a blood star. And my children, we will be the passing of light, body to body. We wear our people's blood and smear the sky with it. So when the rest look up, they too will see nothing but faces in the clouds. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you all. I have to say, this has really been an experience for me, in the sense that, you know, as I was sitting here listening to all of you, I was thinking of the theme here, across the water, and I was thinking of, you know, how this water has brought all this great talent to these shores, not only Jewish people, but Persians, Syrians, Latino people, Irish, etc., and how we, you know, want to ever stop that. That really defines who we are. So I really appreciate you coming tonight. I think it was really a remarkable performance by you all. What is the next stage? Do you have an upcoming event that you want to share with our audience that to plug into, or some way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. We're hoping to have more of such events. The project is a little bit on hiatus at this moment, but we are definitely hoping to go forward with either events or publications, some kind of folio. But we all have little online ways of getting in touch with us. My website is at olgalivshin.com with a V, Olga. But we would definitely like to see where this goes, because I hear such strong threads into heritage and ancestry, and in many, many ways, all human beings are related. I think the three of us are probably more related than other people, and that is, it's been healing. It's been healing to find, you know, sisterhood and brotherhood, and at this difficult time in our history, to know that this other America, with the shores where people arrive and are welcomed, it still exists.
But to know, I want you to know that Moonstone Art Center is there for you. This isn't like a one-time thing, and you can come to us. You are family to us, and we embrace you. So I speak of Moonstone Art Center, and you know, and I said in the beginning of the program, the love of poetry in the city of Philadelphia. Realize that the Moonstone Art Center sponsors close to 100 poetry events every year, and including Philly Loves Poetry. And we do this partially out of the volunteer and the genius of our founder, Larry Robin. But we need your support. We can't keep doing this without support from the community, not just in listening to people, but giving us other kinds of support. So you can go to moonstoneartcenter.org if you want to give us, you know, your support. And I ask that you do that. This is evidence of this, of what happens in the city of Philadelphia and the great treasure that the city of Philadelphia has in art and poetry. So I wish you the best, and good night to our audience, and stay with us in Moonstone. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you.